Welcome, dear friends. As we begin this 19th year of the Turner Winter Series, I'm Maureen Raveno. I offer this welcome on behalf of Greg Peterson, the founder and perennial host of the Turner Winter Series these many years. We welcome with delight those of you who are with us this evening in the comfort of the Kappa Theater here in the Robert H. Jackson Center, as well as those who are enjoying this program virtually. It is my great pleasure to begin our evening with a brief introduction of our guest, Randall Perry, after which I will turn the conversation over to Jamestown's and the Jackson Center's own Greg Peterson. Randall Perry is the Executive Director of the Chautauqua Lake and Watershed Management Alliance. He works on a variety of lake, watershed, and research initiatives in partnerships with Alliance members and with other stakeholders, all aimed at protecting and enhancing the health and usability of Chautauqua Lake. Prior to his tenure as Executive Director in the late 2020, Randall worked as the Alliance's project manager since 2016. Before joining the Alliance, he served as an adjunct instructor at Fredonia State University of New York, teaching geoscience and environmental science courses, with a focus on water resources, geochemistry, surficial processes, and environmental assessment. Before that, he worked as a geological consultant, specializing in environmental and water resource projects. Randall is a native of Maine, where he earned his bachelor and master degrees in earth sciences from the University of Maine, with a focus on environmental geochemistry. And so, with this impressive background, it is now my great pleasure to welcome back Randall Perry with Greg Peterson to give us an update on the state of our Chautauqua Lake.
Randall Perry, we've done this 4 years. We started the Turner Winter Series with you, talking about the state of Chautauqua Lake, and we're honored to have you back again. And how'd your football team do in Maine this past year?
I will admit that I am not as up to speed on the Black Bears as I should be, but I did hear over Christmas that the hockey team's good again, so looking forward to maybe a little playoffs for the spring, but we'll see.
This is the Black Bears.
This is the Black Bears, yes.
You've been at this for some time now, and are you at a point where you can sort of gauge the actual progress of Chautauqua Lake and Watershed Management Alliance, just on a curve type basis? Have you had enough perspective to do that?
Well, it has been a very interesting evolution just in the time that I've spent with the Alliance and prior to that in its formation in late 2014. Just like the lake, it's dynamic. We're asking different things of the lake each and every year. Each person or each group uses the lake differently, and in a lot of ways, I kind of see parallels with the Alliance where we've evolved as well as needs and demands have changed, opportunities. They've kind of shaped our progression, and I try to instill in our team, and I think as it was instilled in me when I first started, that we need to provide a structured framework for better decision making, better prioritization, and just a good use of an allocation of dollars. We've got to be nimble, we've got to be ready to adapt, and I'm very proud with how we've positioned ourselves to I think, respond to opportunities and challenges as they come, whether it's several years ago when several of the local charitable foundations charged us with creating a more structured framework for decision making and prioritization and funding allocation, or as the Jefferson Project has evolved in its partnership with Chautauqua Institution and the county. I've been very proud to also be able to step into a facilitating role and a support role for that as well. So, I think we continue to do good things, but as I think we all would do if we were asked to raise our hand, if we think we can do better, my hand is up. So we're certainly looking to continue that evolution, ultimately for the benefit of the lake and its users. So.
How have you seen the evolution of the stakeholders' interest? Because I know part of your mission is collaboration among various stakeholders of the lake. And when it initially started, I'm sure that was the motivating factor of the foundations is, hey, we no longer want to get separate fund grant applications from each of them. Let's sort of start consolidating them so they become consistent. Has that evolved in a positive way where you had to kind of meld many separate disparaging interests, desperate interest into kind of a commonality? How has that evolved?
Yeah, so this fall leading into where we are now, we're in currently our 6th year of that consolidated local funding framework. So since it started in 2018 to where it is now, we've brought in new partners, we've brought in more money. Our year-over-year growth has been, I think, very important for putting more resources into the hands of our members to do work on the lake. The county's role is ever shifting in what place it fills with the lake and the funding of our local organizations and also the way it functions as a governmental entity that's working in partnership with the 9 towns and villages around the lake. That ability to consolidate and that ability to try to line up timing-wise the board at the start of the year has, I think, been helpful when trying to look at not just this many dollars for this group and this many dollars for this group, but really what work do we feel collectively is needed for the lake in the coming year, and what members or other stakeholders or other entities are in the strongest position to fill those needs in a way that's efficient and effective. I think having as many of the pieces laid out early in the year has helped to I think move towards a more collaborative approach and more adaptive approach ultimately to the lake. So the last dollar of the year doesn't necessarily go out in January or February or March. Our board, the Alliance Board, who ultimately, when those grants pass through us, holds the fiduciary responsibility for those dollars. This year, I was very proud to, see that we were able to pace ourselves a bit in the allocation of funds to try to see where the lake was lining up in the spring, see where the lake was heading towards in the summer, and see where the remaining needs were in the fall, and having dollars at the ready was I think very important in being able to meet those needs. Just kind of the last piece of where that the consolidation of resources I think has also helped to the communication and the coordination are 2 places where I think we've gotten a lot better, and I think we do as a whole. There's a lot more of that than there was a handful of years ago. Where we want to get to is more collaboration and ultimately integration, I think, is the destination that we're all trying to get to, and we've got work to do on that because there are a lot of differences in the approaches and the priorities, and those can be strengths when harnessed and directed in a positive way, but they can also be challenging to manage the lake when they are allowed to take over the situation.
Your group, just for clarity, is focused on Chautauqua Lake. Your jurisdiction does not extend to activities that might occur in Bear Lake or Finley Lake or wherever. And so I'm just thinking the process of you have these stakeholders who have interest of their own. They have to kind of go through you to make a grant request so that then gets vetted, which ultimately leads to the Alliance requesting a consolidated grant, seeking a consolidated grant application, right?
Yeah, for the funds that we're
Yeah.
asked to partner on, that's
Yeah.
the general process.
And the source of those funds are the foundation monies?
Yeah, primarily up to this point, the foundations, but also county dollars, have flowed through the Alliance into work products on the lake and in the watershed. So those are the main local sources, but there's also several state programs that we also partner on with our members, many of which are the municipalities, who are oftentimes the most broadly eligible for the types of water quality improvement projects that the state tends to fund. So, we've been really proud to also over the years partner on many millions of dollars worth of state-funded grants that also help to improve the lake and primarily the way the state has set their priorities over the years, a lot of watershed-focused funding. So, there's a whole nother line of revenue that goes into the lake that the Alliance is proud to be a partner on, that operates on a bit longer timescale. These local dollars tend to work on a year-to-year basis. So you'll have your budget and your expenditures for the calendar year, and that's your program for Chautauqua Lake. But these state grants oftentimes work over 2, 3, 5 years. So the timelines are different, but also the scale is different. And of course the money's coming from outside versus inside is an important factor to consider. Yeah.
So the consolidated funding grant application, I think I saw the number 800,000. Is that
Yeah, that's the amount that we've requested
from the foundations?
From the foundations that are participating in this endeavor, yes.
And that lists a number of projects which have been sent to you from the stakeholders.
Yeah, we solicit ideas in the fall, summer to fall of the prior year from our membership to have them identify their priorities, their objectives for the coming year, and their funding requests that go along with that, yes.
Does it also include the enhancement of the tarp skunks winning their championship? I'm just curious.
Taylor might have read them more closely, so he might have caught the Jamestown baseball section, but I moved over to the section 2.
See, you're a 10,000-foot guy. That's the problem. We digress. I think it's important that, this is in one of the articles that I was reading, that according to county statistics, 66% of visitors to Chautauqua County utilize a lake or a waterway. 47% of sales tax of the county is generated in the municipalities immediately surrounding Chautauqua Lake. $282 million is spent annually by tourists to the county, and $3.2 is invested in Chautauqua Lake each year. And of that $3.2 million, $1.7 is used for watershed projects, $1.3 million is for in-lake projects, and $250,000 is used for lake monitoring efforts. Are those statistics that you put out, or is that?
Well, it's funny. I guess I didn't have to memorize those numbers because you just read them off. But those are county prepared numbers.
Okay.
That was part of a project that we helped work on, a fact sheet and some information about not just Chautauqua Lake, but the waterways in general. It's, as with anything, the exact numbers are going to vary from year to year. Mm-hmm. Some of those numbers are tied to what the Alliance does, and others are more countywide. I can say that since 2015, we're looking at, when we talk about Alliance partnered projects, which are ones where the Alliance participates or helps fund or helps manage. We're at just a shade over 50% watershed investments, around 40% lake, and then around 10% of research and monitoring. That's overall, so that includes all those state grants, many of which are geared towards watershed work. When you flip that to the local side, what you'll find is that a higher percentage of our local dollars have been routed into lake management projects, because those are where some of the discretionary spending is available. So, our numbers fit well within those, and we're happy to partner with the county on putting that information together.
Also, just from a real estate tax payment, which of course pays the budget for the municipalities, it's always, I don't know if you have at the ready, the kind of around the lake, the percentage value of the Chautauqua County assessment, if you will, around the lake, but it's significant.
Yeah, the number, the specific number on the proportion, I've seen sometimes vary depending on the method by which it's assessed. But, you know, roughly speaking, when you look at that ribbon of land between the two state routes that ring the lake, you're looking at around 1% of the land area of the county. And what you see is that there's a disproportionately high amount of tax revenue generated from those properties. I've seen somewhere on the order of 25% of the county's property tax base. Again, those figures can sometimes vary, but a pretty big disproportionality of land size to value. So a very, very important resource, not just within that narrow band, but all the countless businesses and individuals who also benefit from those revenues, but also those visitors that you just pointed out, and the sales tax, and it all works together. It's an engine, just like the lake itself is an engine in that it works in a lot of very dynamic, very interrelated, but difficult to sometimes tease apart, systems within systems. So too, I think, is the financial piece and the way that this lake drives our economy, but also our culture and our recreation, our employment, all those ancillary things that come together to really make things, either go well or go less well.
Well, I think it's just from my perspective, being around for a while myself, that I think now there's a much more complete understanding of the economic engine that Chautauqua Lake has. I mean, I think in 30, 40 years ago, it may have been taken for granted, not completely appreciated that you have to invest in it in order to get that return on investment. I think now what you've done and a lot of the publicity that goes with that is critical. And along with that publicity, I know Jay Young's behind us here, and he's your PR mogul. How do you keep those individual residents who pay 25% of the assessment and the budget around the lake, keep them informed? I mean, many of them live out of the area. Is there an email? Is there a way to track all that? Do you make an effort to keep those guys in touch?
Well, first, if I may, I mentioned Taylor West, our project manager, Ye Young, our communication coordinator, staff, do a great job, and I just want to, before I forget, because I will forget, I just want to say, that I appreciate that, and my board as well. But we have public meetings every other month, which are both in person. We've been meeting in the Lawson Center at Bemis Point, which is a great location for those public meetings. But we also put them online. We Zoom, remote access them. We've got a website that, I'm very proud of the work that Jay and before him Taylor did to get that website up, where we try to put as much good information as we can, things like annual reports and meeting minutes. So anybody that doesn't physically attend a meeting or Zoom into a meeting, there's ways to catch up. We do manage a modest, I'd call it a modest listserv for those who are interested in our meeting notices and things like that. We always welcome more people. One of the great things about our membership is that it includes all 5 towns and 4 villages and Chautauqua Institution and the county as well. So, through our members, not to mention the NGOs like the Chautauqua Lake Association and the Chautauqua Watershed Conservancy, Chautauqua Lake Partnership, who manage thousands of their own members and their own stakeholders. We think that there's some pretty good long-reaching tentacles, but I'm always amazed anytime I do get to have a conversation with somebody who reaches out. It's always nice to know that everybody doesn't live it 24/7, and the amount of information that we can deliver in a one-on-one conversation if somebody calls our office or reaches out. I find a lot of value in that too. So again, always can do better, but also we're not passing laws. We're not a regulatory body. We're not a governmental organization. So I would certainly encourage the towns, the villages, the governments who ultimately have the authority to do the things that will impact folks like, folks like those people, the residents, the taxpayers, those out of state and in state. Just continue to engage through your local government, because that's ultimately the way that the basis for our existence, is really steered.
Data, not only data distribution to your stakeholders, but data gathering is also very much in the fore of your mission, but also in many of those who are part of that, because I think everybody wants to try to make good, sound decisions based on scientific data. Can you kind of update a little bit on the data sources that come to you on the lake? I mean, there have been various projects, Jefferson Project comes to mind, but others as well. Can you kind of outline those?
Yeah, it's a very dynamic system, again, of the academic side of things, because as researchers, we'll have different graduate students interested in Chautauqua Lake or some other water body. You may get ebbs and flows from some of the research institutions, but in terms of the core partners that have continued to collaborate and contribute, I can give just kind of a brief overview, and certainly each one offers. Again, we try to encourage as much coordination, just like we do amongst our members doing work on the lake, driving machines around or doing watershed work. We also try to encourage collaboration and sharing of information amongst the researchers as well. And that's been one of the real highlights with these last several years, with all these groups coming together, bringing outside interest and local buy-in and new technology and new approaches. It's been really exciting to be able to liaise with them. But, you mentioned the Jefferson Project, which, is a partnership of IBM Research and Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. And coming from out Lake George way, the Lake George Association is a partner on its foundation and its work out there. And then, of course, Chautauqua Institution has been the local shepherd for that, for several years. We've been proud to be a partner in some of the initiation and moving it forward. And of course, the county this year stepping up with a large amount of funding for their operations. And this year also, marked a really big turning point in that we've come a long way with the lake data gathering and information gathering on the lake. But this year, through the generosity of the Ralph C. Sheldon Foundation, who issued a grant through the Alliance, which we then passed to the Chautauqua Institution. We're going to be building, we as in the collective, but the Chautauqua Institution partnering with the Jefferson Project, building tributary monitoring stations, dedicated stream monitoring stations that'll be the first of their kind on this lake. So that's going to be a big step forward in understanding the watershed side of things and really helping to inform what we really need, which is a better handle on the budgeting of not just water, but what the water's carrying, the nutrients, the phosphorus, the nitrogen, those key drivers for lake dynamics. So, that's one big arm of things on the research side.
Can you pause for a second? We've heard the term, at least I've heard the term, the Jefferson Project. We know Chautauqua Institution has been intimately involved in it. But could you explain kind of what is the Jefferson Project? Let's assume not everybody knows.
Yeah, so it's a research initiative. It's a collaboration of three main entities that started about 10 years ago out on Lake George, which is over on the eastern part of New York State near Albany. So IBM Research, Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, or RPI, and the Lake George Association are the three partners on the Jefferson Project. They continue to work on Lake George. They expanded their efforts to Skinny Atlas Lake, which is more in the central New York region. And then in 2020, they came to Chautauqua to start working on our lake as well, in partnership with the Chautauqua Institution and others. So their aim, regardless of which lake they're working on, but for Chautauqua, the aim is really to understand, ultimately trying to understand the drivers and the inhibitors of harmful algal bloom dynamics. But through that, to get there, you got to understand the dynamics of the lake itself and all the different systems which are working in concert with one another to, manifest themselves in either good conditions for the lake or more challenging conditions for the lake. So harmful algal blooms are going to be those highly concentrated setups of these typically cyanobacteria, which can be, not just unsightly and aesthetically unpleasing, but actually health hazards in terms of the toxins that they can produce, the things that they can do when present in high enough concentrations to pets or to humans through skin contact or ingestion or even inhalation. So they're a very important piece of this whole thing because, Chautauqua Lake is a pretty productive lake. We have a lot of biomass that does things in the lake, whether it's aquatic plants or whether it's these algae communities. Algae in and of itself, extremely important backbone of the ecosystem. There's plenty of algae that oftentimes get unfairly maligned because they get lumped in with these blooms and cyanobacteria that are the real troublemakers, if you will, in the lake system. So that's really the crux of the work. But again, to get there, to unravel it, to figure out, what's potentially causing these things, what's potentially inhibiting these things. It's not just the occurrence, but it's the lack thereof. Sometimes it's also important. Ultimately, the goal would be to, prevent, or when they occur, to mitigate the impacts of them, or maybe even to figure out a way to, predict and to manage around them, or, so those are lofty goals, and it's going to take a lot of work, and it already has taken a lot of work to get where we are today with the amount of, information that they've been able to unveil, for this lake. But they're not alone. They don't work alone. They work in partnership with other researchers. Bowling Green State University has had a presence here on Chautauqua Lake and in its tributaries since around 2019. SUNY ESF has been working on the lake in partnership with, in particular, the Chautauqua Lake Association, doing algal community monitoring and work like that. SUNY Oneonta has had several roles on the lake from a research standpoint, both through plants and also through harmful algal bloom related things. And then full disclosure, it's my wife up at SUNY Fredonia, but she has been doing a lot of work as well on the lake, working in partnership and on her own. Each of these entities, they have sovereignty and direction over their research programs, but where we've been really fortunate is, I think, by bringing what we've brought to the table as a community and as a interesting problem, we've got a lot of these researchers wanting to work together, wanting to share resources, wanting to share information, and it's just been very refreshing to see that horsepower coming together on the academic side, because with that we've also got other professional entities that are also gathering data and generating information for the lake. On the academic front, there is also North Carolina State University, who's been playing a very big role and a growing role on the lake, in particular on the plant, aquatic plant side of things. But them, along with folks like Racine Johnson Aquatic Ecologists, they're a consulting firm that's been doing work on the lake for many, many years. Princeton Hydro, Solitude Lake Management. There's a whole list of groups that are all coming together and providing, this, for a complicated system, a multiple lines of evidence approach, I think is really important. Taking a single piece of information and basing what is oftentimes a big dollar and also big impact decision on it is not necessarily prudent. So understanding that there are a lot of different places where evidence can be presented, and the challenge is, and the fun of it is, they don't present themselves over the same time scales. So you have to be thinking in not just the short term of what did this year look like compared to last year, what did today look like compared to yesterday, but in the medium and the long term, because sometimes the data set takes a while to grow. For one example, New York State DEC, they organize what's called the Citizens Statewide Lake Assessment Program. And since the 1980s, that program, through the volunteer work of folks here on Chautauqua Lake, has been collecting water quality data every 2 weeks during the summer season from the same locations in the lake. And that data set, while you take a year of it, it may seem like not nearly as interesting as a high-frequency sensor that goes up and down the water column every hour. But the power of that data set is in its longevity. So each data set, just like each organization, has its pros and has its drawbacks, and trying to maximize the utility of them and minimize the shortcomings of each is really I think an important tenet of all of this, to know that there sometimes takes patience, to understand that uncertainty is always going to be there. And rather than spending our time and energy trying to deny that there's uncertainty, let's spend our time and energy trying to reduce it in the most important areas to try to close some of those data gaps that we still have and will always have. But that's one of the places where this multiple entity, multiple approach, I think is going to yield a lot more results than a one-dimensional way of looking at it. It was a long answer to a short question, but
Well, here's the biggest question I have. So we talk about data gaps, and your wife's a researcher, you're in the business. I'm visualizing Taylor West, our fisherman extraordinaire on your staff, finding some Chautauqua Lake caught fish, brings it to you, and you over dinner put it in front of her. And the two of you are thinking about whether to eat it or not, or do you analyze what that fish had just been consuming? I just want to know, does this really become an academic exercise when you're sitting down with your wife? Not? I could just visualize you guys talking about stuff that isn't normal in front of a Friday fish dinner.
well, I'm glad you brought up fish, because I omitted it accidentally. But the DEC, the fisheries group, I think that's another area that we've got a wonderful resource, not just from a regulatory standpoint, but from a research and intellectual curiosity standpoint, because they're watching after multiple sport fish communities that help drive that economy we were just talking about. That's one of the biggest things about Chautauqua Lake, is whether it's the walleye or the bass, or I'll stop listing fish because I'll name one that I'm not supposed to. But we've got folks that are constantly here on Chautauqua Lake gathering information from anglers, or doing fish surveys, or checking out habitat, and that's stuff that also, I hope, is continuing to evolve in a positive direction, just like our water quality and plant monitoring programs, because they all have to work in concert. So in terms of what's in a fish and do I want to eat it, Chautauqua Lake has a wonderfully strong fishery, and one that is just, I hear delicious, but maybe I'm not as big on the partaking, but that's more of my taste than anything else. So.
Recently, Governor Hochul, in her State of the State address, addressed Chautauqua Lake and included a section about Chautauqua Lake, which, along with the Eastern Finger Lakes, will receive help from the state to deal with harmful algal blooms with an effort to restore recreational opportunities on the lakes. Hochul said she will direct the state DEC to work with state, federal, and non-for-profit organizations to implement pollution reduction strategies, advanced water quality monitoring, and complete a feasibility study to determine the extent and severity of internal phosphorus loading in Chautauqua Lake. Do you know what that means?
First I'll preface it by saying I don't have any further information than what you just read and what we've, been hearing. But I will say that I thought about this because I thought it might be something you'd want to talk about. And while I apologize for not having more details, in my humble opinion, I think it's a testament to what we're bringing to the table now as a lake community interested in not only managing the lake and using the lake, but understanding the lake. Because what we're going to come armed with in terms of pre-existing knowledge and data streams and collaboration and research framework, I think is going to put us light years ahead of where we would have been a few years ago if this opportunity presented itself. So whether it's timing, whether it's just good, honest, hard work to get to a point where that type of stuff can be said about our lake, I think it can only be positive. Now, the details, I think the Post-Journal today put it, the devil's being in the details because sure, there's a lot of different ways, whether it's amplifying existing lines of work or lines of grant opportunities. That's a very different situation than bringing in more directed funding to help mitigate or combat harmful algal blooms. Whether it's more staff level interest and dedication to Chautauqua Lake, that's another way that help can come from the state. So I'll be very interested to see the approach that the state takes. But I can tell you that in the conversations I've been privileged to have with certain entities, whether it's Army Corps of Engineers at the federal level or others, I think there's a lot of positive feeling about what we're bringing to the party in terms of our prior investments and our ongoing investments to try to get a more practical understanding of the lake. There's the academic side of things, which very interesting, very important. But then there's that practical application of knowledge, and I'm hoping that we can continue to try to marry those two things so this community can ultimately feel comfortable taking bold action if bold action is warranted. In the end, the best model or the best spreadsheet or the best set of data doesn't make a decision. It's still going to be people that make these decisions, and it's ultimately those with the authority to make those decisions. And the DEC is a very logical partner because they hold full and objective regulatory authority over the lake and what goes on in the lake. So it seems like a very fitting union of that with our lake and our path forward.
A term that was used in this article that I'm reading from, and I think it's from Michael Hill, president of Chautauqua Institution, who talked about to implement smart lake, quotes, technology to measure and monitor lake ecology and inform mitigation efforts. The term smart lake, is that a term of art in your business?
Well, it's you put smart in front of anything, it seems more marketable and more interesting to the youth, right? So, again, I go back to my former point of, a smartwatch doesn't, get you to work on time. A smartwatch gives you information that you then use to inform when I should leave the house and what route I should take and where I should park and, whether, so, a smart lake, again, figuring out, how to balance action and management and with good, objective, and comprehensive monitoring tools, and ultimately a good head on your shoulders collectively as a community to know when you need to adapt or change or question yourself or challenge your preconceived notions. So, I think a smart lake can mean a lot of things. There can be lakes equipped with a single buoy here and there, and that could be enough for that particular water body. I think what we're finding with Chautauqua is the uniqueness of each basin, but the interconnectedness of those basins to form the lake. The very high degree of variability in how the South Basin acts and reacts versus how the North Basin acts and reacts, the types of ecological setups in both those basins, the way that people use each of those basins. I think that necessitates, and I think what we're seeing with some of the outputs from the Jefferson Project work, that a higher frequency monitoring program can open up a lot of eyes to what's happening on a day-to-day basis or an hour-to-hour basis on the lake that, at least initially is important to understand. You may find as you learn more that you can make certain assumptions or lump certain things into a bigger pot. But until we know better just the basics of how this lake is functioning, I think there is an argument for flooding the market in terms of the data collection, both spatially spread out over geography and temporally, i.e., how often you monitor for variable X or Y. So, again, a smart lake also requires smart people to do something with the information, and I'm very hopeful that this community has got those chops.
Talk to me about the South Basin and the North Basin, two seemingly ecological different animals. In your study, what have you learned? Have you learned something that sort of surprised you in the differences between how the South Basin operates and the North Basin?
Well, I don't want to get ahead of myself on what we expect to learn from the upcoming written report from the Jefferson Project, which will be forthcoming soon. Just generally speaking, both basins could be lakes on their own. It's about 7,000 acres in the North Basin, about 6,000 acres in the South Basin. So both basins, are larger than many of the lakes that are being looked at elsewhere in the state. So it's a good opportunity, good big challenge. The shallowness of the South Basin, I think one of the original assumptions, or one of the assumptions that maybe was at least put in place until we knew better, was that stratification, or that setup of density differences in water layers to basically segregate upper waters from lower waters. That stratification maybe wasn't as prominent in the South Basin because of the depth, being quite shallow. I think what we're seeing in some of the data that we've seen already, and that we'll be seeing more of soon, is that there are times when stratification can set up in the South Basin, which really makes it even more interesting in terms of that dynamic and how it might be impacting water quality and enjoyability of the lake. Because when stratification happens, because it's two separate units of water, separated by different densities, different temperatures, you can get very different chemistries. So oftentimes bottom conditions can yield more nutrient enrichment, oftentimes less oxygen. And that setup is one thing, but it's when those deeper waters then get introduced to an area where algal blooms can cause a problem near the surface, and that mixing, is, so it's really interesting because it's not setting up and staying that way for the course of the summer, whereas some of the spots in the North Basin, that tends to happen, where you'll get a setup of stratification, and that'll persist for quite a while in certain areas.
Does that explain, I live in the South Basin, where some day the water's crystal clear, and the next day it's sort of pea green, as if I've heard the term, the lake sort of turns itself, it flips. Is that really a stratification moment?
Well, it depends. There's also things like, shear stresses along the bottom. So when a boat drives by, or when some large vessel disrupts the water column, or when internal waves, which is another interesting phenomenon that the Jefferson Project team has been looking into. There's a lot of ways that lake water can be churned up. And frankly, with algal communities, they're very interesting because some of them can move, not just laterally, but also up and down in the column. So, there's a lot of other dynamics that you would, want to consider, but that's, again, where this multiple lines of evidence approach is needed because, phenomenon A may line up great with condition A one day, but then phenomenon A may happen almost exactly to our eye exactly the same way, and condition A may not be anywhere like what it was before. So we can't just be on a single tracked kind of, well, it was this before, we think, so it has to be that on and on and on. So there's the weather we're finding is, not that we're finding, it's stuff that we had a good sense of, but understanding the how these things are working together, the wind, the precip, the temperature of the water. So probably, could be as simple as a layering situation that gets disrupted, or it could be something a little more complicated than that.
I guess just from a practical viewpoint, people think of the North Basin and the water runs towards the south out the Chautauqua, like one smooth direction. I understand that's probably not the case. That sometimes just the stratification is water actually goes towards the north. I mean, there's a process.
Yeah, I mean, currents in a water body are, they're going to be driven by different things with depth. So wind, at the surface can drive things. We know the wind doesn't always blow from north to south. So prevailing winds that set up over the right angle and the right, extent of water can impact currents. But we also, again, things that we are seeing in some of the prior presentations and what we'll be seeing more of in the subsequent report this year from the Jefferson Project's work is that, yeah, you've got phenomena where waters can move, from the South Basin to the North Basin, whether it's at the surface or at depth. Those are things that was important to consider, because it's not just, when you think about what that means, water moving is just one piece of it. It's what's the water got in it when it's moving, and what's the overall mass transport. Just the directionality is one thing, but the amount of mass, the amount of stuff that's actually moving from A to B is ultimately going to be one of the big determinants on what impact, if any, it has on the water quality at its final destination. So, you got to think not just about that it's moving, but what's it moving, how often over the course of a year, what's the net, impact of mass movement from one basin to the other. So it's a very interesting phenomenon, and certainly those who have responded to storm events or flooding events, there's plenty of evidence out there that would suggest that stuff on the water has moved in the direction that you might not expect. So it's very, but to have the Jefferson Project team, really try to put some firmer understanding on it, that's where the progress will be made, because then you can either identify it as a key thing that needs to be further investigated, or potentially, have it fall into a different category of interesting, but, maybe not as impactful, or maybe. We just don't know yet. So,
Look at one of the slides that you at least gave to me. Progress Through Partnership, it's entitled. Alliance Partnered Projects from really 2015 to 2023, year to date. Over 100 grants, projects, and programs valued at $11 million, which was a blend of lake, watershed, and research monitoring. You've been with the Alliance for It's 2016 in some form or fashion. Are you optimistic about Chautauqua Lake?
I am. I think, I think it's always, in this line of work at least, it should be cautious optimism. You don't want to, celebrate too early or lament, too early either. It's an evolution. It's, asking a good question is a good start, and gathering data and information to try to answer that question is a really good step 2. But step 3 isn't always the answer. Step 3 is, in many cases, a better question, and constantly trying to challenge ourselves, in what we're finding as at each step along the way, I think is ultimately going to be, I hope, a source of progress. When you look at the classical layout of managing a lake, there's these steps, whether there's the 11 steps or 8 steps, depending on which format you subscribe to. But take action is always one of them, and we're really good at taking action on Chautauqua Lake. We've been managing it in some form or fashion for well over 100 years. When you think about if you want to say aquatic plants and algae are two of the main drivers of interest and conversation and concern. You think about the aquatic plants, we've had a pretty detailed assessment dating back as far as the 1930s. So we're coming on to 100 years of looking fairly critically at aquatic plants. And then you think about the algal situation, and yeah, while there was some dips into that in the 70s through the eutrophication studies and the identification of the need for sewer systems and things like that, much of our information has really burgeoned from around 2010 onward. So we're playing catch up on what might be the most critical piece of the lake's well-being, and how it's going to look in 10 years or 20 years or 30 years. So playing catch, I think we've been very successful playing catch up because we got a lot of smart people working on it. But now where we're, I think, challenged is trying to figure out how those two things that have been in a lot of ways progressing on parallel tracks, how we bring them together and figure out, how much of what we're doing is having an impact on them, and how much of what they're doing doesn't give a rip about what we're up to, or things that are out of our control. Because I think compartmentalizing that and figuring out, there are certain things that we just do not have control over. So identifying what those 2 or 3 or 5 or 10 or 1 thing is that we do have control over, and identifying that as the avenue where future investment should go, I think is it's promising, because while we're unique and while we're special, there's a lot of lakes in a lot of places that are going through similar situations, and many of them are not armed with nearly the resources and the brain power and the interest and the passion that we have here at Chautauqua. So that right there is a reason for optimism. And when you look at things like conflict or disagreements, when they're approached in good faith and they're supported by good, objective, comprehensive information and data and understanding, disagreements can be very productive when it comes to innovating and solving problems. So that right there is another reason for optimism, is that we do disagree on things, and that's a promising step for this lake as well, because we're getting smarter in our disagreements, and we're hopefully approaching them in good faith, and we're hopefully aiming towards the same objectives. We just have different ideas about how those objectives might be achieved.
As we're getting towards wrap-up time, the question I always ask is, what have we missed, Randy? What's the question that we should have asked, just to get a sense of the state of Chautauqua Lake, that we haven't asked that you would like to share?
Well, I I'd hoped you'd ask me about the Iowa caucuses, but you didn't, so. Absent that, you know, there's so much. No matter which piece of the lake you want to talk about, whether it's the people or the plants or the algae or the fish or the watershed or the money, you know, you can do hours on each one. So, you know, I do really appreciate the way that you know, step back and to a certain degree hold me back so that we can, you know, stay within time. You know, I think one of the questions that we always should be asking ourselves, and is what are, you know, the more we can ask each individual or each organization, what are your objectives for this year or for this month or for this week? You know, I think that's an important question that we're getting better at figuring out, is what is your goal statement? What are your objectives? Because the more we can get those lined up, you know, yours, we oftentimes going through that exercise can find commonality and also when you get to the end of the year, let's not just do a reset and a redo, you know. 2023 is done, 2024 is here. Let's not forget 2023. So, you know, a great question for a lot of people is, how did you see the lake in 2023? And, you know, I think that a lot of work was done. I think the lake itself, I think we were prepared. I think we did a lot of things in 2023 that we hadn't done in years prior. Whether it's getting out on the lake early in the spring for survey work, getting together, whether it's meeting down at the Harbor Hotel in May to talk about expectations and objectives for the year, the new equipment that came online. You know, we had a project, you know, up in Asheville where a new invasive algae called starry stonewort has started to rear its head up there, and we had, you know, kind of the epitome of collaboration where we had the Chautauqua Watershed Conservancy, you know, doing project management and permitting. We had the Chautauqua Lake Association out there operating machines. We had the town of Chautauqua out there operating the MobiTrack machines. We had a new you know, a couple new skimmers that were purchased through a county-earned grant at the state level, feeding stuff to a county-purchased conveyor that was identified as a need, you know, recently. So it was groups and equipment coming together to demonstrate that you know, we can make progress on this one particular species, but I think it was indicative of what we can do when we work together. You know, and ultimately the conditions coalesced to be pretty good this year. It was interesting. The plant growth, and generally speaking, was less than maybe the year prior. Mm-hmm. Again, trying to unravel what was due to us, what's due to natural conditions, what's due to other things that we don't even, you know, understand. You know, the algal, the confirmed algal blooms through the New York State's reporting system were about, you know, we're almost half what they were the year prior. Interesting, right? But what differs now is that instead of just kind of scratching our chins and heads and moving on to the next year, we've now got a network of monitoring and research that we've never had before at this level, watching the lake, so that we can start to say, okay, we saw these manifestations on the lake of plants and algae and general people's enjoyment of the lake, and a lot of that was trending in a positive direction in 2023, you know, shoreline debris. And, you know, it actually opened up an opportunity for the CLA in the fall when they're oftentimes you know, cleaning up the nearshore area in a final sweep of the lake. What they were able to do is go start addressing large debris safety issues that they normally would have to wait until the spring to work on. So, you know, we flexed as a team. We took the opportunity of a maybe lighter than expected year, and we put those resources to good use, you know, doing other things to help the lake. So, you know, those are, I think, this year of all, you know, we're in the best position to not only think about what the lake looked like and how people saw it, but to actually get under the hood a little bit and say, okay, Jefferson Project or SUNY Fredonia or Oneonta or ESF, what did you all see on the phosphorus side, on the nitrogen side, on the transparency, chlorophyll, all these things that we know are important, but we're just not exactly sure how they're important yet, how they all fit together yet. So that's really exciting to, you need good years and you need less than good years. You need it all, and you need to be critical each year, good, bad, or otherwise. So, that's a question that I find to be somewhat cathartic when you start to run through kind of the steps you took, how the lake threw you some curveballs, how you tried to adapt as a team, and how you're going to take what you learned in this year and put it to good use in the year we're in now. So,
Well, I am so optimistic because you're optimistic because you are working on this smart lake technology on an ongoing daily basis with some very smart people that you've identified, but most importantly, from your team with Taylor, Jay, and specifically you. I really enjoyed this. I mean, you're really articulate and put this into perspective, and I'm a guy that probably would never understand the deep, dark technology and the percentages and all of these things that you otherwise see every day, but you're able to translate that into lay terms that hopefully those people who've listened to this for the last hour will appreciate, because I certainly did. So thank you for making this a reality.
well, I really appreciate the time to be here and just the chance to talk to you each year. It's been really fun. So whoever's sitting in this chair, I think, has a great opportunity, and I'm very humbled to have it in these last 4 years. So thank you, and keep getting better. So.
Well, thank you, because our next year is our 20th. I'll check with the co-chair, Maureen, and I'm sure you'll be back. Ladies and gentlemen, Randall Perry. Thank you.